Toward a Place of Wholeness by Viola Evans. And Cass is going to read that for us.
Okay. This is a recent opening reading from the UU website, and it was written in response to what's been going on with COVID and what's happening with the Unitarian Church. We are Unitarian Universalists. We lift up our 7 principles. Some of us think of them as a form of theology, but they are more important to our collective than that. They do not tell us what we should believe. They tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with each other. We are brought here today by the fact that Unitarian Universalism has fallen short of the image that was presented to the world and to many of those who embraced this religion. But we are also brought here today by the truth that Unitarian Universalism has shifted course to move toward a place of wholeness, a place that perhaps never existed for us as a denomination. It has been a long and sometimes unforgiving road to today, but we are here today because we are mindful of that past and because we have hope for the future. We want the practice of this faith to be a fulfilling manifestation of its promise. So open your hearts, seek new ways of understanding, and come, let us worship together.
So now we'll move on to our chalice lighting. So if someone, Tony, could light the chalice at church, and I'll light one behind me.
For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul.
And now we move on to announcements. So are there announcements at church?
Jancy?
The coffee's ready, but it's disgusting because Tom wouldn't let me put in more coffee. It's his fault. But coffee is served.
All right, that almost sounds like a concern, but any other announcements?
Jean. Go ahead.
Jean.
Okay. Yes, for those who like bluegrass music, Becky Buller and her band are going to be at the Tullahoma Civic Center this next Saturday at 7 o'clock. They are incredible.
All right, thank you. Any others at church? Is that Karen? Yes.
Yes. Pledge drive update. I've received 8 pledges. It amounts to 20% of what we have proposed in the budget. The deadline for getting pledges to me is Friday, March 18th. After that time, I'm going to start slashing. You can email me to uutullahomatreasurer@gmail.com with your pledge. You can mail it to me as long as it gets to me before the 18th, before the 18th. Because I really don't come up to Tullahoma except for church to check the mailbox. So I prefer if you email it to me. If you want to follow up with a written pledge, that's, fine, but I save all the emails as pledges. And I guess that's it.
All right.
Oh, also, I just want to make an announcement that this is the first time since we've been in person that there are more people in the church in person than there are on Zoom.
Other announcements? All right, I have a couple. If you would like to join us for a 5 o'clock service, you can join us at 5 o'clock. And then at 7 o'clock, we have a The annual meeting our annual meeting for the church will be on the first Sunday in May. So that's 2 months from right now. That's part of why the pledge drive is going on. So what's happening at the annual meeting is we'll have an election of officers, we'll have the approval of the budget, and some bylaws changes. So that's what's coming up. As far as election of officers, we will have 2 vacancies on the board. One is for the continuing trustee. That's a 3-year term. It's the only 3-year term on the board. The others are all 1-year terms, and the primary purpose of that continuing trustee is to be the institutional memory for the board, for the church. The other is the vice president for programs, which handles basically the Sunday services, arranges for speakers and for the service leaders. So those 2 positions are available. So if you're interested, let one of your board members know about that. And finally, COVID numbers, they really are going down. The last surge here with Omicron seems to basically be over. I think the number was a week ago, the numbers are a week old, but it was basically 16 cases per our 7-county region. So that's really good news. So the numbers we appear to be over that or past this surge. So that is it. Other announcements? Last chance.
Nancy, just mostly, are the change in the bylaws going to be told to the congregation, or have they been told and I missed it?
I think you missed it. We talked about it at the last board meeting, but yes, they will be shared.
For the congregation, not just the board meeting, the whole congregation. Do they know what's going on?
Yes, Nancy. What happens is the board the congregation, the members need to receive notice of the annual meeting 14 days before the board meeting. So at least 14 days before the first Sunday in May, that'll be sent out. So yes, all the bylaws changes have not yet been worked through by the board. That's what we talked about at the last board meeting. We'll work on that again this board meeting. So I can go over those very briefly, or the ones I know of that I think for sure we're going to do. We're changing, our bylaws state that our annual meeting will be in March. We haven't been doing that for quite some time. We've been doing it in June. So we're changing the bylaws to say our annual meeting will be in the first Sunday in May. We're cleaning up the bylaws a little bit with the duties of the secretary, just cleaning that up. And undecided, but we're discussing including a provision in the bylaws to join the church remotely. That's not been decided. We don't know if we're doing that or not, but we're discussing it. And there's also discussion about including something about dealing with disruptive behavior within the congregation, how to deal with that. We don't have a policy or bylaws on that. So those last 2 are being discussed. They may or may not be on the annual meeting agenda.
Thanks for reviewing that. I appreciate it.
Okay, and Karen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that according to the bylaws, that everyone voting member in the congregation is to receive notice of the meeting, a text of my proposed budget, and the actual text of the bylaw changes 2 weeks before the annual meeting.
Okay.
So, yeah, they'll be out.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep. Anything else? All right. So then we will now have a responsive reading.
All right.
And this is called All of Nature is Sacred by Lorelei. Oh, well, sure. Lorelei Greenwood Jones. For the love of all began with the world.
All of nature is sacred.
Every creature is a thinking, feeling being.
We are blessed with a wondrous variety.
We are part of nature in every being on the planet.
on the planet,
okay, little typo there, on the planet, what we do to one affects the many.
in this web of existence, we are each a strand. Our pushing and pulling moves the fabric of our world.
Each bird and insect, each fish and four-legged creature, all are our siblings.
Let us treat them as we would one another, with compassion and dignity, with understanding and honor.
The love that we show each being radiates outward, a beam of kindness and caring that can be felt with the heart.
And in turn, our hearts receive that love from each being, and it echoes onward to eternity.
All right, now it's time for our speakers. So Deanna Black will be our speaker today. So Deanna, it's all yours.
Is this safe? I'm not sure. I'm just gonna say it again. There's two of you, and it's extremely disturbing. The timing, she's a different time on the screen.
Oh,
and with
yeah.
her mouth is going like,
It's annoying.
it's really,
Yeah.
the timing is like
You
this.
can't help but look at it.
So good morning, and first of all, I would love to bring you greetings from the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Cookeville. It's a joy to be here with you today, and we'd love to figure out maybe how to network with you more. Maybe we could do a picnic this summer or something fun. By way of introduction, my name is Deanna Lack, and I'm UUCC's lay minister since 2019. Our minister, Mark Pafford, was leaving to pursue other things, and I expressed a willingness to serve. He suggested that I get trained through the Central East Region's Commissioned Lay Ministry program, which I expect to finish in the next few months, and I'm also working on a degree in religious studies at MTSU. Our topic today is waiting for Armageddon, and it's deeply meaningful to me because I was raised in a religion, Jehovah's Witnesses, that expected that the end of the world would come at any moment, and still expects that. The scripture at Matthew 24, 6-7 talks about you're going to hear wars and reports of wars, nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and food shortages in one place after another. And we took this as evidence that God's kingdom was imminent because honestly, there's always wars and reports of wars. So I thought, beginning in high school, that it would happen at any time. Maybe you too have experience with a religion that believes in the rapture or in the end of the world. I rejected this theology in my 20s, and yet I confess that there have been times in the last couple of unprecedented years when I thought, boy, what if I was wrong? So this discussion will be my personal experience and an exploration of the experience of a member of my congregation, and also some concepts and issues with this mindset. So let's dive in. The Shepherd's Rod was founded in 1935 at the Mount Carmel Center. It had 11 members, but immediately began recruiting with some success. Its leader, Florence, prophesied that the 1260 days in Revelation would end and the kingdom of David would be established beginning on April 22nd, 1959. Hundreds of followers sold all their possessions and moved to Mount Carmel in anticipation of the end time. They were bitterly disappointed when they woke up on April 23rd and it was business as usual. The group almost didn't survive. Only a few dozen remained. But they did survive, and they gained members. Leadership shifted over the years. There were some sketchy events, including one leader who killed a roommate with an axe and was found not guilty by reason of insanity. They had a major recruitment drive in 1985. By 1993, there were 130 members on the compound, with a new leader who changed its name to Ranch Apocalypse because he believed that his compound would be ground zero in the coming war to end all wars. They stockpiled 11 tons of arms, including anti-tank rifles. Now, given their beliefs, when 76 heavily armed members of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau came to investigate reports of a cache of illegal weapons, The only conclusion these cultists could have come to was that they were there to begin the apocalypse. In 1993, the Attorney General authorized an attack on their Waco, Texas compound. ATF attempted to flush out with tear gas, but they were fighting for God and refused to leave. In the end, 80 people, including 5 children, died, including their leader, David Koresh. I'm sure many of you remember that. When you have a conversation about doomsday cults, Waco is almost impossible to not bring up, along with Jamestown, the Heaven's Gate cult, who left their bodies via suicide in advance of the end of the world with the Hale-Bopp comet. These are stories that were headline-grabbing tragedies. There's phrases in our common vernacular like drinking the Kool-Aid that are a reference to the fact that some 900 died at Jonestown. They too believed that the end of the world was coming. But apocalyptic thinking is hardly exclusive to cults. It's easy to write it off as crazy, but some kind of doomsday theology is featured in nearly every major world religion, back to Zoroastrianism and the medieval Norse view of Ragnarok. The theological word describing a religion's thinking about the end of the world is eschatology. And the second coming of Christ, of course, is central to most Christian religions. According to a recent Pew study, 41% of Americans believe that the end of the world is coming before 2050. And I'd be willing to wager that here in Tennessee that number is much higher. Likely, a large majority of our neighbors believe this, which I think is why it's important to discuss it. From a personal standpoint, the moment I think of as my departure from my belief in the religion of my childhood was when I was explaining to a psychologist what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. I explained that they believe that Christ began reigning in 1914, marked by events like World War I, that the generation alive when that started, according to Scripture, would by no means pass away until all these things occur, meaning Armageddon. I explained to the psychologist that God will kill everyone except believers. Who are the believers, he asked me. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses. He said, so only Jehovah's Witnesses will be alive? And as I answered yes, the wheels started turning in my head, and explaining to a non-believer had struck me as really messed up. But I believed it for years. I recall being in high school, thinking that I won't graduate before the end comes. If you told me that we would still be here in 2022, I would have been shocked and dismayed, and have said, no way. That prophecy that says that the people alive in 1914 wouldn't die, there are 108 now. The Watchtower adjusted that interpretation in favor of new light on scriptures. I knew that a member of my congregation, Joe, also grew up in a religion, Seventh-day Adventists, that was pretty heavily invested in belief in the end of the world, so I asked for her perspective as I wrote this. She sent me a long email about many different aspects, and I saw remarkable similarities in the psychology. So I'd like to share some of that with you today. When I Googled the title that I'd chosen for this talk, I noticed that there was a documentary of the same name. It states that 50 million Americans believe the Bible literally. Afterwards, I had some questions, so I asked a Baptist minister I'd had a conversation with. He said that not everyone believes in a rapture, but the important takeaway, he said, is that Christ is coming soon, and that after his return, the opportunity for salvation will be gone. What, I wondered, are the psychological effects of believing this? I came across a story of a recovering Christian who tells about when he was young. One day, his parents were late coming home, and so he hunkered down in the basement with his Bible, some animal crackers, and, quote, every knife in the kitchen. He said he thought his parents must have been raptured, and that he was, after all, wicked and left behind. When they came home, he didn't say anything to them. In the documentary, several young Christians said they really did believe and they wanted Christ to come, but they hoped that he'd wait until they got married and had a family. Neither of these scenarios is uncommon. When Roy Moore was in the headlines a few years ago, a hashtag rapture anxiety tag trended on Twitter with young people relating the stories about how this affected them as young people. And I'd like to share what Joelle sent me. She says, I still see the profound effects that the Armageddon mindset has had on people I care about. My grandfather, heartbroken as he cares for my grandmother, who is slipping away with Alzheimer's. He never expected to be here long enough to lose her. Still clinging to the hope that Jesus will come before he has to bury her. When I saw them last week, he was so disturbed by the idea that I might one day get old. When I called the aging filter on Snapchat, which made me look nearly identical to my grandmother, a potential peek into the future. Spending the afternoon with him and my grandma, I really felt his palpable disappointment at still being here and having to face the death of his lifelong love. Almost a sense of betrayal even. He lived his whole life in hope of a soon return of Christ. How could this be allowed to happen? My best friend in middle school and high school was always terrified of the end of the world, always having nightmares about it. At first afraid that the world would end before she had her first kiss, before she got to be with a man, before she got to be married, before she got to have children. Whenever she accomplished one thing, her anxiety moved on to the next thing that she was afraid that she would not get to experience. Although I had a pretty active devotional life and believed wholeheartedly in all of it, I tended to take a less precipitous view about the end of the world. I didn't think things were bad enough to end yet. I would comfort her that even if it did end before she got to experience something, surely heaven would be better and more fulfilling than sex, etc. We would walk around at recess, talking about what we could do, where we would hide in the prophesied end times, when all true believers would be persecuted just before the return of Christ. Would we have to hide in the woods for months? Where would we go? It was scary and a little exhilarating, always feeling like the world was always on the verge of collapse. Although I wasn't as distressed as my friend by these fears of the world ending, it certainly colored my thoughts and plans for the future. There was also this persistent anxiety about needing to spread the word, because there's this belief that Jesus will not return until every living person on earth has heard the gospel. It's easier to dismiss environmental concerns when it's all going to burn away in the near future. Among many people, there is the belief that we should take care of the earth because it was made by God, but the value of it as a life support system going into the future for future generations seems less important when one believes